to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please. Councilmember Glauser.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Stanfield.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Trent.
Here.
Mayor Long.
Here. We have one proclamation tonight, which we would have done at our last council meeting, but because we didn't have anything else on the agenda, we canceled it. So we're a bit late, but we still care about this Congenital Heart Defect Awareness Week. So I just want to go ahead and read this proclamation, even though the week was February 7th through the 14th. Whereas the health and well-being of all children throughout our city are of paramount importance to cities, families, and communities. And whereas thousands of children are born with birth defects every year, including approximately 40,000 children, 1 in 110 in the United States who begin life with one of more than 35 identified forms of congenital heart defects. And whereas congenital heart defects are among our city's most common birth defects and they can be fatal due to their seriousness, insufficient effective medical intervention options, and the limited availability of infant donor hearts. And whereas the origins and symptoms of congenital heart defects are becoming more readily identifiable and the range of surgical options are expanding continuously thanks to doctors and scientists' diligent research efforts and field experiences that extend our body of knowledge every day. And whereas there is much to learn about the causes of and effective treatments for congenital heart defects, and it is important for parents, family members, pediatricians, and nurses to recognize the warning signs associated with congenital heart defects among newborns so they may provide proper treatment as early as possible. And whereas many of the city's families and communities are directly or indirectly affected by infant illness and death caused by congenital heart defects, and I applaud the efforts of doctors and scientists everywhere who work diligently to solve life's medical mysteries and to improve the quality of life for us all. Therefore, the City of Fortuna proclaims that February 7th through the 14th, 2020 as Congenital Heart Defect Awareness Week in the City of Fortuna, and I call this observance to the attention of all of our citizens. Who's accepting this? Do we have anyone? There she is. All right, at this time, if anyone has any comments from the public that are not on the agenda, you have 3 minutes to address the council. Please be advised that we can't take any action on anything that is not on the agenda, but if you'd like to speak, please come up to the microphone.
Good evening, Katie Garrison, Kelly Way, Fortuna. I would like to publicly thank Bob Nett, who is an employee of the city. I had a phone call with Bob a couple of weeks ago explaining that I thought that many streets in Fortuna were missing their stripes, and it was becoming increasingly difficult if you were driving at night to know where you were on the street. And as I'm reading your mission, where it says providing timely, efficient, dependable, and well-planned services, Bob Nat listened to my complaint and said, well, as money would come available, we will hopefully get more striping. Especially I wanted the striping on Kenmar Road. Within 2 days, the striping appeared on Kenmar Road. So that was very timely. So I would like to thank Bob. I did send him an email, but I would like to publicly thank him for getting that done. That's it.
Thank you, Katie. It's always nice to hear the positive things about our employees. Anyone else? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our consent calendar. We have 9 items, including city council minutes, administrative department monthly reports, community development, finance, parks and rec, police, public works, river lodge, and report of disbursements. Does anyone wish to pull anything? No?
Oh, come down to me. Thank you very much. Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve all consent calendar items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 Did you want to read the list, or just,
that's fine.
we'll just fast track it? I make a motion to approve 1 through 9.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to our discussion, wastewater national pollutant discharge elimination system. Presentation and discussion by Project Manager Rebecca Crow from GHD. Welcome, Rebecca.
And so just before we hand it over to Rebecca, I just wanted to say a few things about this item. The city's been working on wastewater compliance projects related to disposal for nearly 2 decades. What's clear is that the city's percolation ponds are no longer a viable option for long-term disposal. We have diligently worked over the last few years to identify options for treatment and disposal that will have the least impact to the city and its ratepayers. And we are currently poised to undertake a wastewater treatment and disposal project that will provide means for compliance with regulation in the foreseeable future. There's a number of ways that we've been able to cut down costs on this project, so you won't see all those in the presentation, but it's something that we've been working very hard on. And just, we're not looking for any decisions tonight. What we're really looking for is just to provide the council with an update on where we are with this project, what the current options are that we've identified as our preferred option, and then to really share what the next steps are with the council. It's been a little while, and we just got to the point where we actually have our concept designs, cost estimates, and really kind of a roadmap of where we're going to go in the future. So with that, I'd like to have Rebecca make the presentation.
Thank you, Merritt. Thank you, Council, for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to work with the city and the city staff. You've got great staff here. I echo, it was great to hear a compliment city staff at the meeting. It was really nice. I'd like to first start with just a brief summary of what I'll be talking about this evening. I'm going to give an overview of your wastewater treatment facility, just so folks know what's out there, and a recent improvement project. We're also going to talk about regulatory issues and timelines, what the city's being required to do by the state. We'll review the different disposal options that the city has investigated over the years. Next, we'll look at the treatment options that we considered and where we landed in terms of a preferred treatment option. Next, we'll look at project costs and potential impacts to ratepayers and different funding options. And lastly, we'll take a look at next steps. So the existing wastewater treatment facility, as here, was constructed in the 1950s. It was most recently had a major upgrade in 2004-2006 timeframe, and I'll go over what that was in the next slide. It provides secondary treatment, and it currently discharges to either percolation ponds on the Eel River, which are located here in the summer, or to Strong's Creek during the winter time period. Here's an overview of the wastewater treatment plant. So sewage is discharged into your collection system, which flows to the city's headworks that you can see labeled there, where large material and grit is removed. If flow exceeds the capacity of the system, the city has an equalization pond, and then when flows are reduced, that's pumped back into the system. From the headworks, it goes into the treatment process, including clarification, activated sludge, and disinfection. There's a separate solids treatment train, which includes anaerobic biosolids digestion, dewatering of the biosolids, composting, as well as odor control facilities. And lastly, the liquid effluent is discharged. Like I mentioned, in the winter, it goes there to Strong's Creek, and in the summer, it goes to the city's percolation ponds. The city constructed an improvement project in 2004 to 2007 period. That project included an upgrade to the headworks. It included a new clarifier. It included major improvements to the solids handling system. So that was the anaerobic digester, a mechanical sludge dewatering system, and solids composting and biofilters for odor control. It also included a cogeneration system whereby biogas that's generated as part of the city's treatment process is combusted to create electricity to offset the city's need for electricity from the grid. It included a new water reuse system that was installed for non-potable uses. So prior to that, the city had been using treated water for a lot of the internal processes. This allowed the use of recycled water, which reduced the demands on your potable water system. And lastly, it included SCADA upgrades. And SCADA is your supervisory control and data acquisition system. It's basically the electronics that let the plant all talk to each other so that it operates smoothly and doesn't require 24/7 operators on site. Unfortunately, that project did not address treatment efficiency or effluent disposal. And so that left the city with two compliance issues that the regional board is concerned about. So the first is disposal related to the percolation ponds. So there's a potential direct connection between the ponds and the Eel River, and that would violate the regional board basin plan, or the governing document that governs all discharges in the North Coast Basin, essentially from Del Norte down through Sonoma. So it has a prohibition against direct discharge to the river in the summer, and there's concern that those percolation ponds are connected to the river. Also, the city has a compliance related with effluent quality. So the nitrogen effluent limits in the city's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Permit, or NPDES permit, have become more stringent. So related to those two items, the city has been issued two compliance time orders. So the first compliance time order is actually called a time schedule order, and it's related to your disposal system. The second is a compliance schedule that's within your NPDES permit, and that's related to treatment. So if you look here in terms of what's required, for the time schedule order, the city is required to evaluate water quality impacts of discharge on Stong Creek and the Eel River. The city was required to evaluate site-specific disposal alternatives, and complete a technical report for the preferred alternative. Both of those items have been completed. On the treatment side, so we're moving over here to the second schedule, the city was required to complete a sanitary sewer evaluation study. So that was essentially a study to look at all your pipes in the collection system and see where there's different water getting in there, either through manholes or groundwater, and then make a plan for repairing those, and then also develop a technical report for the preferred treatment alternative. All four of those items have been completed, and at this point, the compliance schedules tend to merge, and they match each other, because essentially, you can't decide on a final treatment option until you've determined until you've determined your final disposal option. Some of the options that we were looking at, as you'll see in some of the next slides, required really high levels of treatment, and so understanding what your disposal was drives some of your treatment. At this point in time, we've also completed the preliminary report of waste discharge. The upcoming items that are due in your compliance schedule include completion of CEQA by June of this year, securing funding for the preferred alternative by June of next year, securing necessary lands and right-of-way. At this point, that only applies to the land disposal portion. You don't need any new land at your treatment plant site. That is required December of 2021. Next, December of 2022, the state would like you to have final design plans ready to go out to bid for both the treatment and disposal system. And lastly, the state would like the city to have the project completed by December of 2022. The city did recently apply to the state for a planning grant, so the first several items on here that are completed were paid for in part with grant funds. That was really helpful to the city to offset some of those costs for some of the studies that were required. Let's see. So I'd like to start with going a little bit deeper into the disposal side of things. Like I mentioned, that's a driver for treatment, so it's a good place to start. The city did consider a wide range of disposal options. The city completed what we called a pre-feasibility analysis, actually, along the lines of about 7 years ago now, looking at a wide range of options. Here's just some examples from the table. In this next slide, we're going to look at a little bit more of the options that were considered and how the city selected two options to investigate further. So the city looked at new summer options. So right now, the issue is a summertime issue with the percolation ponds. We looked at irrigation of agricultural lands at, essentially at agronomic rates. And then I've got some estimated costs in here. We'll talk about those a little bit when we get to the end of this slide. We looked at municipal and industrial reuse with recycled water a lot when we're bringing up wastewater. Folks are like, why don't we reuse it to water our lawns or this? Here in Humboldt County, that becomes difficult because we tend to get more rain than sun. And so the water balance doesn't really work out. It's also very costly to install a whole new piping system to distribute that recycled water. We also looked at land application with groundwater discharge. We also took a look at several year-round options, trying to answer the question, is there an option that would be more cost-effective than going to Strong's, during the winter and somewhere else during the summer? Is there an option we could go to year-round that would be better? So we looked at disposal to new, larger percolation ponds. We looked at injection wells. Could you just pump it back into the groundwater? Because those were questions that were coming up at the time. And then we looked at year-round surface water discharge. So out of all these options, 2 were determined to be recommended for further study. One was the land application with groundwater discharge. And as you can see, out of all the land application alternatives that we were looking at, that was the least cost. And as Merritt mentioned, that was definitely a driving factor as we were working through all these different studies. The city really wanted to take the time to make sure that we were evaluating the best options and looking at things that might be least cost to the ratepayers. It was also worth, when looking at this option, to consider year-round surface water discharge. That was also the lowest cost of the year-round options and had potential benefits. I'd like to talk next a little bit more about the surface water option and explain why the city's likely not moving in that direction. So, surface water disposal is really an uncertain path to compliance. Currently, direct surface water discharge is not allowed under the existing water quality control plan for the North Coast Basin. There is no provision that would allow an exception, or you could put water cleaner than the river in there, and currently right now there is no regulation that allows you to do that. The city conducted effluent tracer dye studies and water quality testing to determine the extent of the hydraulic connection between the existing percolation ponds and the Eel River. And as we'll talk about in the next slide, it was determined that there is some type of hydraulic connection, the extent of which is hard to determine at this point. Surface water regulations are only anticipated to become more stringent in the future. So when we're looking at low flow summer conditions and direct discharge to surface water, the concern is that even if you can get it permitted over time, they're going to become stricter. So you're always chasing treatment requirements. There's also no clear regulatory path to allowing year-round surface water discharge. As I mentioned under the first bullet, there is no provision in the basin plan that says, yes, do these steps and we'll let you put water back into the river. So, we've been working with the regional board and, they've been willing to talk to us, but they couldn't say do A, B, C and you'll be able to get here. So, and that was a concern. So at this point, we're recommending discontinuing the use of the existing percolation ponds for summer disposal. Both the dye tests and the water quality monitoring results indicate that there is a hydraulic connection between the ponds and the river. The flow path of the connection appears to be parallel. It's kind of hard to see, but if you look, there's kind of a ancient sort of remnant channel. And when we did testing, we found, we were definitely able to see some markers of some of the water quality constituents that we were chasing kind of up here where this sort of remnant channel joins. The fluctuations in the river indicate that the rates of infiltrated wastewater entering the river vary greatly. Only a portion of the wastewater enters the river. And we concluded, well, the city could continue to do additional testing to show that potentially the effluent has little to no effect on the river. It would be a really long regulatory process. It is very uncertain and likely that treatment requirements would continue to increase in the future. Thus, at this point in time, the city is moving forward with land disposal of effluent in the summer and continued use of the Strongs Creek outfall in the winter. So the land disposal search did identify some suitable parcels. So this was going on concurrently. The city was not putting all their eggs in the surface water basket and had been doing a lot of work to sort of casually start talking with landowners. It's a big process. It was really important to city staff to not be looking at anything that looked at eminent domain. We wanted to work with willing landowners. We wanted to find a site that met multiple requirements. So down here in this little map, you can see this was our first sort of search that we put together a couple years ago. Most of those parcels are all ag. At the time, we were looking at planting a crop and irrigating a crop. Moving forward, the city expanded the search, and we're looking at pretty much any large parcel within a several-mile radius of the wastewater treatment plant. And we were able to identify these set of parcels that have a willing landowner that's currently willing to work with the city on a potential land disposal project. It's nice that a lot of this site, it's kind of hard to see on this map, but a lot of this site is not really vegetated at all. So we're not looking at taking any land out of agricultural production. We're not looking at constructing this on prime ag land. And that was a nice factor because it's likely to reduce costs to obtain the land because it's not actively being used in ag production. And we've also found historically in this area, there has been some opposition from the Farm Bureau and local farmers to the use of treated effluent for irrigating crops. So we were able to avoid some of those conflicts, but identify a site that was suitable for land disposal. And on that note, we did conduct analysis that showed that the site was suitable for land disposal. So we looked at land use and zoning, which was acceptable. You'd need a conditional use permit, but it's likely acceptable at that site. We installed groundwater wells and monitored those, and I'll talk a little bit about what we found there. We did soil percolation and infiltration testing at the site, which came out favorable. We conducted a water balance to determine, well, how much area do we need to dispose of the city's effluent, and found that we could keep it to a pretty small footprint overall. We did a groundwater impacts analysis, and the results of that were favorable for this site. And then lastly, we completed a preliminary design, which we'll show you next. So the site is suitable for land disposal based on groundwater and soils testing. So in November of 2018, we installed 7 groundwater wells at the site and monitored those over a period of time. The fluctuations in groundwater were what we expected. We saw higher groundwater in the winter and lower groundwater in the summer. There was about a 13-foot range between the winter and the summer. We also conducted soil profiling at the site. So these little these test pits here, we dug a big test pit. We put in some rings. We put in some water, measured the rate that it infiltrated, and were able to measure that. So the site showed very high percolation and infiltration rates. The percolation rate at the surface ranged between 34 and 582 feet per day, which is pretty high. And then the infiltration testing, which is sort of the deeper infiltration into the lower soils, ranged from 40 to 254 feet per day. In the end, we looked at that data, took a geometric mean based on some guidance from EPA, and used a value of 130 feet per day. And then our actual design only used 5% of that value. So you can see, as you'll see moving forward, we were very conservative in estimating the amount of water that could be infiltrated at that site. And we're still able to keep it to a fairly small footprint. The other key thing that we were looking at was that connection between the site and the Eel River. And what we found is there is no direct discharge from this site to the Eel River. So we were able to use the information from the groundwater monitoring wells and calculate an average groundwater flow direction and gradient. So you can see here the groundwater flow direction was at 310 degrees azimuth. And that makes sense to us because it follows the landforms. It also follows the path of the river, and it's flowing at 0.0008 feet per feet, which is essentially meaning it's flowing pretty slow. And we took that number to estimate, well, how long is it going to take a drop of water from when you put it in your percolation site or your land disposal site to get to the river. Using the higher rates that I just talked about on the last slide, we estimate it's going to take about 22 years for your effluent from that site to reach the river. Hence the conclusion that there's no direct discharge. After 22 years, yes, it gets to the river, but there's no direct discharge, and feel that this site would be compliant with the basin plan. This analysis is currently being reviewed by the regional board. So just a little concept layout of the overall system. So here you have the wastewater treatment plant. We're looking at installing a new pump station. If you're familiar with the berm project, we took the old chlorine contact basin that's out there and converted that into a wet well for a pump station. We'd use that same setup, put in a different set of pumps. We would do a horizontal directional drill of a pipeline under the river. It would be approximately 40 feet under the river at the deepest spot under the bottom of the river, and then it would connect to our subsurface percolation site. The final site that we selected presented some challenges as well as opportunities. The site is a little bit difficult to access, but the city is working with neighboring landowners to obtain access easements so that we don't have to access it off the river bar. The site's currently located in a 100-year floodplain, so the system is designed to allow it to essentially be flooded. There are no electrical components out at that site. All the electrical is on the other side. Everything on this side is mechanical. The site's also currently used by off-road vehicles, and the design is intended to discourage this use, but again, as you'll see in the next couple slides, everything's below the ground. So it's intended to be fairly robust for where it's located. And lastly, the site contains opportunities for natural restoration. So the city has been talking with permit agencies, and there may be opportunities in the future to further leverage the fact that there's now treated effluent out there to enhance, to develop different restoration projects or things like that. So it opens up additional opportunities for environmental benefits at that site as well. So next we'll take a plan view look at the concept design. So here you see that that effluent pipe coming, this is the one that would come across the river. The system has been designed to distribute secondary treated effluent through a network of perforated pipes in trenches. So these are, there's 4 groups of perforated pipes that we have up here. The new system is designed for a maximum month summer flow and includes future for expansion. So the way that we've designed it right now, these 2 units can handle your existing projected flows, but within the design, we've essentially laid out a whole duplicate system so that you've got lots of redundancy and robustness in this solution. And then here's another sort of concept drawing that we came up with. So here's where we're looking at potentially adding some features that would further protect the site from either floodwaters by slowing it down or further protect it from other people who may be accessing the site, looking at natural things. Here's your subsurface percolation pipe. Water would then just infiltrate into the ground. We've got a clean out here. We'd be doing some minor grading of the site, but really not too much. So that's the summary of the disposal system, and I think the city's been really fortunate to find this site, to find a willing landowner, and I think really appreciate the time that the city's taken to really do the investigation to come up with the right solution. So this now leads to the treatment alternatives that we were looking at. So when we approached this initially, we didn't know what the disposal was going to be. So we were looking at 3 treatment levels. The first, level 1, was the least restrictive, and those were for potentially options that would be land only, if you were able to potentially use the water to irrigate ag lands year-round. The second level, enhanced secondary, that's really what we're targeting for this project. So that would allow for land disposal in the summer and winter surface water disposal. And then level 3 was tertiary, and that's where we were potentially looking, if you're going to the river year-round, it's likely we're going to have a really high level of treatment. So that was the most restrictive. In the end, level 2 was what we selected that matched with the disposal alternative. The city also looked at 3 types of technology. We looked at the Sequox or Aeromod process that's currently used in Rio Dell and Ferndale, and I believe also at Bear River. It's a proprietary system that only the Aeromod company makes, and so if you went that direction, you kind of have to go with all their processes. We looked at the membrane bioreactor process, so those are the, almost similar to, kind of in your mind, a reverse osmosis system, a little bit different, but it's got membranes that's used to treat the effluent, and really that was included in case if we had to go to that really high treatment level. If you have to go to that really high treatment level, it had benefits, it was worth evaluating. And lastly, we looked at a non-proprietary biological nutrient removal alternative. And this alternative maximized the use of existing equipment on site, but still was able to achieve the required end targets. So at this point in time, we obviously did a cost comparison when we looked at all these treatment alternatives, and this gets really busy, but the A's are all those Aeromods, these B's are all of the membrane, and the C's are all of the non-proprietary. At this point in time, we are moving forward with alternative C1B, which meets the city's treatment requirements for land disposal. There's a couple reasons that this was the preferred alternative, other than cost. One, it was the lowest cost and provided the greatest reuse of the city's existing equipment. But it's a non-proprietary system, so there's no sole source requirements. There's not only one person who can bid on it. So all the individual equipment components can be comparatively bid. It's a proven treatment configurations. It's used at thousands of installations across the world to meet similar treatment limits. It makes maximum reuse of the existing facilities on site, and it had the lowest life cycle cost. The disadvantages are that there's no single system supplier furnishing a comprehensive system and performance guarantee like those other systems. That's similar to your existing system today. The city has great operators. That's something that we can overcome. It also relies on a design engineer for system training and troubleshooting versus, again, the single system supplier, but believe that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, and this is a good option for the city. Next, wanted to touch on, so not only did the city evaluate, hey, what do we need to upgrade to get to the treatment level that we need? What about, especially since we're relying on it, what about the existing system on the ground? The city did a condition and capacity assessment of the existing structures that are on the ground, and found that there are a couple hydraulic limitations, and then there were some existing treatment limitations. The proposed alternative addresses those treatment limitations. However, if the city were to not move forward with any upgrades, the treatment limitations that were identified would still require some amount of improvements in the future just to maintain existing treatment levels. Some of your equipment components are undersized for the treatment loads that are coming in. But the nice thing about this alternative is that it will address these existing hydraulic and treatment system limitations. Okay. I'm going to go through what the proposed treatment improvement includes. It includes modifications to 3 existing aeration basins. We'd essentially expand them. Currently, there's waste-activated sludge and filtrate equalization basins at the end here. We would expand these, which would then require us to construct new waste-activated sludge equalization basin and filtrate equalization basin. And then to achieve the additional treatment of nitrogen, we would need to add a new supplemental carbon source as well as a new chemical feed pump. So those are the basic components of the proposed new treatment. Another item that the city considered that's going to come up as we talk about costs is an optional UV disinfection system, and this could replace the city's existing chlorine gas system. So UV has been determined to be the safest alternative for wastewater disinfection. There's no disinfection byproducts right now. The chlorine can sometimes attach to different particulates in the wastewater and form disinfection byproducts that then become something the city has to address. And then no chemicals must be transported, stored, or handled. Right now the city has to have a chlorine risk management plan because you've got highly pressurized chlorine gas sitting on site. So that's something that you'll see. Next, I'd like to dive into costs. So our cost estimates. Costs that we considered capital costs for both treatment and disposal, and then we also considered operations and maintenance costs. For operations and maintenance costs, we really considered new costs only, so the numbers that you'll be seeing here are only new costs. They don't include your existing operations and maintenance cost. By moving forward with this, the city will not have to rehab the perk ponds annually, so we did account for that reduction in operations and maintenance costs. And then regarding the UV, our analysis at this point, we're pretty much breaking even in terms of the offset from the chemical costs versus UV has electricity costs and also the bulb replacement costs. So they've got those series of UV bulbs that the water goes through, so those require replacement more frequently. Here's the big so what. So capital cost summary. So this capital cost summary includes engineering, legal, and administration fees for both treatment and disposal. It includes costs for land purchase and easement. Within those costs are attorney's fees, appraisals fees, things like that. And that includes construction of a new treatment system, construction of a new disposal system, and construction management for a total cost of just under $16 million. When you add UV to that, that obviously adds treatment costs. And when you add UV to the system, we're looking at just over $19 million. So what does this mean in terms of city costs and the ratepayer? So we took a look at that. So this breakdown shows the capital costs both with and without UV and an estimated contribution from the city reserve. So historically, the city has known this is coming, has been setting aside some funds. So there's some amount of city funds. Again, this point it's estimated. So it brings down the remaining planning costs. We estimated an annual payment based on a 30-year loan at 2% interest, which is pretty standard from the state board right now. So we're looking at an annual payment of just under $500,000 for the project with no UV, which relates to a rate increase per residential connection, so per house, of approximately $7.34. And that increases to $9.56 if we're looking at cost with the UV system. So we took a look at a very common grant program, the same program that the city tapped into to assist with the planning grant funds I mentioned earlier. So the state has what they call the intended use plan. It comes out every year. It governs how the state will disperse their, they get money from the federal government under the Clean Water Act. They also get money from Prop 1, Prop 68. They may be getting some water from the new, I believe, SB 1 that's funding a lot of programs. And that dictates how those funds can be allocated to communities. And what we're looking at here is that Fortuna, we're a population of less than 20,000. We looked at your median household income. So Fortuna's median household income based on census data is just under $45,000 a year. And then we looked at the MHI as a percentage of the average residential wastewater bill. So currently your average residents, again, some pay less, some pay more, but your average residential wastewater bill is $53.84 a month. Currently that's 1.44% of your median household income. To be eligible for grant funding, you have to be over 1.5%. And once you hit that threshold, 75% of your project is eligible for grant funding, up to a total of $6 million. Well, when we looked at the last slide, if you recall, just the base project would look at increasing customer rates by over $7. We're only looking at a needed increase of about $2.30 to hit that 1.5% threshold where grant funds would kick in. So it's reasonable at this point to believe that if the city goes through a process to conduct a rate study, that it's likely to result that rates would need to be increased, especially looking at these planned capital costs, which would kick the city into a portion where you would be eligible for grants. So we took the same analysis and assumed that the city would be eligible for grants. So here's the estimated city contribution. Then we did an estimated grant contribution of $6 million. That may change. Again, I mentioned every year the state board comes out with a plan of how they're going to allocate their money and who gets what. They've been similar to this for the last couple of years. So I think this is a reasonable number for where we're planning at right now. And then, so it reduces the amount of the project cost that we would have to loan fund. It reduces the annual low payment, and we get to an annual increase of $3.30 to the average bill. With a project with no UV, and just under $6 for a project with UV.
Rebecca, could I just make one clarification?
Okay.
Real quick. So these numbers, we just wanted to give the council an idea. This is not a rate study. The $5 million listed, the city has almost twice that in reserves. We just wanted to get an idea of what we could be looking at in a project. So these are rough numbers. They're not a rate study. I think our finance director looked these with us for about 5 minutes. So we were just trying to ask the question, and when we show an expensive project like this, we want to say, okay, what's our pathway to funding? What could the potential impacts to ratepayers? So this is really just for the council to understand where this could go. These are not final numbers. These are kind of just to give the council an idea of what this could mean.
So Rebecca, if we have to raise the rates $2.50 or whatever to get to that 1.5, do we now add another $3.30?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So really, it's like $6 still,
Yeah.
approximately. Okay.
No. Sorry, I did not understand your question. The $3.30 would be inclusive of the $2.30.
So if we were able to get the $6 million of grant funding towards the $15 million project or $16 million project, if we were able to reduce the rates to get above that 1.5, it would reduce the potential increase by about $4 with
Correct.
the non-UV option. So, that's something we really want to look at. It's kind of counterintuitive of if we raise rates a little bit, it saves us more. So, but it has to do with the grant funding. And again, these type of grants are the city would be very competitive, and most of the time, if the funding's available, it's something we could get. So, we'd want to start pursuing this program as soon as possible, and then start looking at the potential. But Rebecca will get into next steps in a minute.
The last little piece on cost that we looked at was to then also look at annual operations and maintenance costs. So we estimate that in net, with the additions and the reductions and the new facilities, that there would be an increase of about $30,000 a year, which is about 45 cents per residential household. So it would bring that number, the increase, up to $3.75 for the base project and just under $6 for the project with UV. So that brought us to the point where we've identified a preferred disposal alternative. We've identified the site. We've studied it. We believe it is a suitable site and has lots of opportunities for the city. We've developed a treatment option that matches that disposal option and maximizes the existing infrastructure on site and was lowest cost based on our analysis. Wanted to touch again on our compliance schedule here. So the items up top we've completed. The next item is to complete CEQA. That's due in June. As part of the planning grant, the actual CEQA document has been completed. We've done all the special studies. At this point, we're just waiting for the city to decide to circulate it. I think want to do some additional follow-up with landowners and some of the permit agencies before the document was on the street, but it is essentially finished and ready to be circulated. We mentioned securing funding, securing the rights-of-way, final design, and construction of the improvements. In another format, bullet format without dates in general, is essentially we need to complete the CEQA process, complete a rate study like we've been talking about that is going to support the city's need for rates to support this project, apply for final design and construction funding, secure the proposed site, complete the permitting, complete the final design, and then complete construction by December of 2024. Thank you for your time and your patience. I don't know how long I went. It probably went way longer than I planned, but there was a lot of material, and again, really appreciate your time, and I'm open to it.
No, that was a great presentation.
So we listed this as a discussion item. Originally, it was going to be a presentation in the event that the council did have questions, but I'll just say 6 months ago, we were still looking at a $30 million project and didn't know the site. Maybe it was a little bit longer than that. So we, working with GHD, have really been able to bring this down. It's been something we've been working on for a long time, and we've just gotten to this point where we're comfortable with the project. So again, and we don't see significant barriers. We've consulted with the regulatory agencies. We've put together the CEQA document. We've talked with landowners, and we have a willing seller. So we've done a lot of legwork to find something that we think we can actually complete. It's a change for the city, one that we've been trying to find a solution to that's been, the regional board is keep pushing the deadline down the road for a long time, but now we have these certain time schedule orders, unless there's a very good reason or significant progress, they won't delay them. So I feel very comfortable where we're at. I don't see another alternative that's really going to provide the value and the solution that the city needs. So again, we've been wanting to present this for over a year, but just haven't been comfortable with where we're at. So we're just getting to that point now, and we wanted to be able to update the council and the public on what our efforts been and in the direction that we're moving forward.
Does anyone have any questions?
One, there was mention of evaluating the current sewer water rates that have been flatlined for 6 years, to actually evaluate that to see if it's justified to raise those rates. So if there was a need to raise those rates, then that would be added on to the $3.70 if you followed through.
Yeah, if I could address that question. So one of the things that we've been seeing is we haven't adjusted rates. I think the last time we adjusted our wastewater rates was in 2012. And one of the things we're seeing is our expenses are getting very close to what our revenues are. For a long time, the city put money into reserves, and we have a healthy reserve just for times like this for a project. So what we will need to do is not just look at the project costs, but look at, what we don't have is what we didn't do last time was a provision for a consumer price index or a construction cost index. Things get more expensive as time goes by. So we don't want to do multiple rate increases. We want to look at it once, make sure we account for the project costs, and also make sure we account for things that naturally go up, like fuel, like employee wages, like healthcare, all those things have to be factored into it, so we're not coming back. The city did a good job of doing analysis for a rate increase. It got us through for a long time. We're at the point now where we've defined what a project is, and so before we proceed with a rate study and we try to, perhaps seek a rate that also qualifies us for grants, we want to do this one time. We want to get to the right answer, and we want to make sure that we put enough money in there so we don't have to go back again in the future.
I have lots of questions. Is that all right?
I got one,
Go for it.
just a comment. But if there's an opportunity to not have to use chlorine, that would probably be an awesome thing, having spent some time in the corp yard and seen that, and then the caustic to get rid of the disinfection byproducts. If we can bypass that, that would be awesome. Sharpen your pencil when you go by that side.
Okay, can I go? Question for Merritt. You completed this sanitary sewer evaluation study. Are we going to have a chance to see that?
We did. That was actually presented to the council. I'm trying to think if you were on, that might have been prior. SHN did that study.
Okay.
And so they had presented to council, and we went through. If you'd like, we could bring that back again.
I'd like to see it.
One of the things that we'll have to look at when we're getting ready to do our grant applications is the state does not like to pay to treat water that's just infiltrated into the system. So sometimes there can be some requirements that you cure enough of your inflow infiltration so that the state's not giving you a grant to treat water that shouldn't even be in the system in the first place. So
Yeah.
I think we're not too far off on that, but there might be some improvements, and that's something I could either share with you, offline, or if the council wanted to see it again, we could bring it back. Either way.
Okay.
There's a comprehensive study, and so we have a really good handle on that subject.
Okay. So the surface water disposal is not an option, but why? I mean,
I
who
can
do you talk to
I
about?
could probably speak that. We've had a number of meetings, and we were looking at potentially lower costs. So in essence, when you're discharging to a surface water, the receptors in the surface water, which are, they're very sensitive compared to groundwater. You're talking about larval stages of fish and amphibians, and so you have a much a lower level of contamination, I guess I would say, that you could have there. And so in talking with the regional board, they only update their the North Coast Basin Plan. They call it a triennial review, so it's every 3 years. We did have a priority on that, and we submitted and asked them to be one of the priorities that they study. Well, during that time that we had 3 years that they were that they were supposedly studying it, they really didn't do much, and they asked basically turn it around, and all the responsibility was on the city to come up with a study and justify why we think it would be okay to discharge year round. Very uncertain regulatory process. In order to amend the basin plan, you also have to demonstrate that you have another beneficial use and a reason for doing it. So it can't be that we want the cheapest alternative. You have to find another use, and trying to find other beneficial uses has a pretty high cost. So another beneficial use might be creating wetlands or adding more stream flow to the river or some other project associated with it to justify continuing the discharge. So the fact that we'd have to do some other type of project to complete that discharge, as well as any number of scientific studies to get the regional board to the point where they had no concerns. It's a very high level of uncertainty. It's one we wanted to pursue in parallel, but we just didn't have good guidance, and we would have had to study things on into the future beyond what our time schedule order and our compliance schedule allowed. I don't think there's a chance of getting that approval within the timeline that we're required to. We could face fines and cease and desist orders. So even though the potential price at our costing level, again, which was order of magnitude, it's not likely that we could have accomplished that without violating the orders that they put on us. So it became almost impossible.
In the presentation, you said that even if our effluence was at a lower percentage of contamination than the river water, it's still impossible. So it just baffled me. I had to ask why.
Essentially, at this point in time, the regulations have no provision to allow for it. So part of potentially pursuing that opportunity would be working with the regional board, and they would have to amend their guidance document to add a process that would then allow the city to then follow that process and go through those steps. So we also agree that it's kind of crazy that it's not in there right now. A lot of these regulations are, date back to when the basin plan was originally developed in the 80s. But sometimes moving forward people's ideas and thoughts.
Yeah.
There's a number, I mean, there's a few examples where people, there's a lot of other cities interested in this, and this would have put us in the front of communities trying to amend that basin plan. In setting a precedent like this, the regional board wanted to be very careful and make sure that they had the right justification to do so. So again, I think even though it seems like it might be a low-cost option to construct, the regulatory approval process would have a long timeline, uncertain costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars of studies. And I think in the long term, that it would have cost more than the direction we're going. We have a lot of certainty. The construction methods are familiar, and contractors can build what we have. Essentially, we're building a pipeline in a leach field, and we're expanding the same treatment process we have. So we're not creating a bunch of new things. We're not getting hooked up to a proprietary treatment system where we have to call somebody every time it breaks down or pay them every year for a software upgrade. We're essentially very similar to what we have with some upgraded things. So it seems like it's in line with what we're able to build financially. Again, we have reserves to pay for almost 3/4 of the construction cost of that project. We don't want to use all of those, but the city can afford this. Granted, rate increases, nobody likes them, but it's been a long time. We've been waiting to know what our future is so we could decide that. And I think, ultimately this is an affordable project by the city. And as you can see, when you look at those rates, we're not too far out of what the guidelines would be to getting, some of those grant fundings, the grant funds as well.
Next question, what defines winter and summer flow rates? Is it a calendar or is it
The basin
monitor?
plan defines summer technically as May 15th through September 30th.
Okay,
So when I use those terms, it's relating to the provisions of the basin plan.
not the flow?
I think they were originally loosely based on flow or estimates of flow, but everybody knows the river doesn't work on a calendar. So
Yeah.
we use the dates from the guiding document, the
Okay.
regional board.
And one of the things, going back to the North Coast Basin Plan, it was developed at a time when all these treatment plants around the Eel River and all these other receiving waters were oxidation ponds. Basically, you took all your wastewater and put it into a big pond, maybe a clarifier. So the treatment technologies were a lot less, and the abilities to treat and maintain a high-quality effluent like the city has were much more difficult. And so it was very protective. And again, we even see that the discharge prohibition period in the summertime, we could see a wet spring where in June we have really high flows like we did last year, or we could see a fall where they're really low, and theoretically we could start discharging again in October. So they aren't necessarily based on science, those rules, and they've been in place for a long time. And so they're pretty rigid unless, the regional board again is going to be very protective about opening those up.
Okay. So question about drilling underneath the river as low as 40 feet below, right? One of the concerns I have in hearing the presentation, two things. Number one, it is in a 100-year floodplain. If I'm not mistaken, last time we had a major flood event that was completely Mother Nature's fault and none of ours. We had a fine that occurred because our perk ponds were inundated with river water. Would that occur again? Fines?
So we won't be discharging to that percolation system in the winter months. So say, for example, we had a massive event, the level we're putting that should be below where we expect to see channel movement, GHG's directional drilling.
But wouldn't that be the same argument for perk ponds?
Well, but I'm assuming that we wouldn't have a violation because we only would be discharging there in the summer, not in the winter. So if you had a flood, our system's not going to be operating. It's going to be our treatment plant, which is now we're allowed to discharge in the winter, so we wouldn't have a wastewater spill in the winter because no water would be going there. It'd be going directly to the river anyway.
I know, but same with perk ponds now, right? Perk ponds are used in the summer,
Used in the summer, right.
but we got a fine because the river overflowed in the winter.
That was an overflow of the city's collection system,
Okay, that's different.
not treated wastewater. There was one where treated wastewater went out. At one point, there was a violation. There was some chlorine because the dechlorination wasn't working. There was some chlorination. So there was a fine for other things, but not because we were discharging to the river in the winter. Different subject.
So my question is, bottom line, we wouldn't be fined for it being in a 100-year floodplain, and it wouldn't be used during the winter months when the river would potentially flood its banks.
Correct.
Okay,
And what we've seen too is when we had that storm event in 2015, we had some overflowing of the system, and we were able to, just like there was last year down in Sonoma County, when those kind of flooding events happen and there's a declared disaster, they're reluctant to come in and find a community. So we've seen some consistency with that, and so we would expect the same thing.
yeah, and I know that you negotiated really well on our behalf, but just the idea that something completely out of our control to start with was something that we were held responsible for at all.
Yeah.
But but that, I mean, that answers my question.
We've thought about it, and if you look at this, what if there is a massive flood, like we haven't seen before, and you do see the pipeline underneath the river somehow get exposed? I mean, it'll be a directionally bored, welded line. Worst case is you have to put that pipeline back in, and that's not really the highest cost part of the project.
That segues to my next question. If the pipeline breaks, then how do we monitor that?
Well, we'll know, we'll have pressure gauges and other things that allow us to monitor the performance of that, and we'll also have, so automatic shut on, shut offs, whether it's high pressure or low pressure, which could indicate a break or a clog or something like that.
Does it have a life expectancy?
It would be HDPE, which is a newer product that has a life expectancy of 50 years, but could be as long as 100. It's a pretty durable pipe.
Okay. And then, I'm going to segue with Mike's comment, and I'd like to hear your recommendation. I guess looking forward without knowing as much as you do about this, seems like UV is probably the way to go as far as the way of the future. Like chlorine will be the next item on the chopping block, if I'm thinking correctly, right? So why wouldn't we spend the extra dollars now to try and pursue UV and have the highest and best at now instead of later, or have to readdress this
Short answer is money.
money?
And if we were going to couple that, who knows what kind of regulations are going to be coming into play. We might want to consider, should we add solar? Will we be able to get solar credits to offset some of the energy costs for the UV? Maybe that'll be a wise thing, and we can pair that with some other grants. That's something that we'll look at as we're moving forward to see what we can do to keep the cost down. But UV might also be something that we can phase in. So say, for example, we can keep approximately $4 million additional, $3 or $4 million for the UV. If we can phase that, and accumulate some more reserves and pay for that in a few years, maybe it's a timing scenario. If we could do one project, get it all done, and have the best solution, that's great, but it's going to come down to dollars and cash flow. I think that we're really going to have to decide, look at the impacts to rates and how we want to implement this.
And at 2%, that seems like
That would
kind
probably
of
be the
smart
time to do
money to do it now, sooner than later. And if we can buy the solar panels with that same rate, seems,
or with a grant for
yeah.
percent, yeah. So we're going to try to put that together. Again, we just wanted to give you a sense of where this is going, and we haven't reported back in a while, mainly because we haven't got to the point where we're comfortable with declaring a project that we want to proceed with.
You're supposed to have the fire department here when you're doing these presentations so they can resuscitate us when you talk about $19 million.
We were really worried when it was over a $30 million estimate. That's why. Sooner.
All right, thanks for indulging me.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you,
All right.
Rebecca.
Thank you,
Thank you
Rebecca.
so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
All right, our next item is fiscal year 2019 to 2020 mid-year budget review by our finance director, Aaron.
So before I hand it over to Aaron, I think the council probably knows that, it's these mid-year financial reviews are important because they give us the ability to look at where we're at and see if we need to adjust the budget. And they're also making sure that, we're staying within our budget, and if we need to make changes, it's time to make changes. So with that, I'll hand it over to Aaron. He's done a nice job putting together this mid-year budget review. be bringing up the PowerPoint presentation momentarily.
It's searching for it, and it says there's no projector found yet. You want to just have the thing and put it over there?
So while we're waiting on technical difficulties, some of you may have noticed that Mayor Pro Tem Tammy Trent had to leave. She has a family emergency. So prayers would really be appreciated for her.
All right, well, good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. While Sienna is bringing that up for me, I'm just going to go over our intent for this report and discussion is to review activities for the first half of this fiscal year, in this case, July through December of 2019, and provide a revised projection of revenues and expenditures to fiscal year end. This will enable staff and council to make more informed decisions throughout the remainder of the fiscal year, and we're preparing our fiscal year 2021 budget. The formal submittal of a review during the fiscal year provides an opportunity to identify and present any fiscal problems to you and to recommend corrective action or additional funding if required. As part of our review, staff is not recommending any budget adjustments in the current to the current adopted budget. Any proposed supplemental budget adjustments by staff will come before council as a separate item for council consideration and approval. All right. So before I go into our mid-year numbers, I just want to recap how fiscal year 18-19 ended, which is our last full fiscal year. And so you'll see for our taxes and fee revenue, they increased by a modest 2.1%. It was right around what we had budgeted, but not quite as much as we had hoped. 2% is one of the lowest amounts we've seen for our revenue increases in the past few years. So we really see that starting to flatline. The $185,000 transfer in was from the city getting authorization to transfer funds, remaining funds from the Fortuna Assessment District Number 1 after we made the final bond payment, and that was a 40-year bond issuance, and it was paid through property taxes. So you can see, looking at 17-18 versus 18-19, our revenues increased by just over 1% or 90,000. Not as much as we had hoped. And then for our operating budgets, salaries and benefits increased by over 340,000. That was mostly due to fiscal year 17-18 having a lot of position vacancies, and so we were not fully staffed for just about the entire fiscal year that year. And so far in 18-19, we've had pretty good luck. We've been fully staffed or close to fully staffed for a majority of the year. So we're 18-19 was kind of full capacity. 17-18 was with a lot of vacancies. The second major effect of 17-18 versus 18-19 was the development fund support. You can see in 17-18 that fund did not require any support from the general fund, and that was because there were the two major projects that were being performed, the McLean Center and the new health center. But then in 18-19, it was kind of back to the normal amount of 130,000 that required general fund support. So bottom line, you can see that fiscal year 18-19 ended with a little over $150,000 surplus, which is a positive. At the beginning of the fiscal year, we were anticipating only about a $30,000 surplus. So we came in a little bit ahead of our target for fiscal year 18-19. So now going on to our current fiscal year 19-20, and how we're projecting out so far this year, you'll see our property tax is, the first half of the year is higher than what we would expect. There was a correction that the county had to make. So a little bit of that is from a prior fiscal year. So we're estimating a little bit of higher revenues for that, but not quite as much as it would appear with how much we've received so far year to date. Property tax in lieu, this is a payment that we get usually along with our property tax. For some reason it was left off this year, so I've been in contact with the county to make sure we get that as soon as possible. They did assure me that since it's been delayed it's been delayed in payment to the city, that they will be accruing interest on that since they've held it for the past couple of months. So we will get some interest as well as that payment here, hopefully in the next week or two. Sales tax, so far year to date, $757,000. That's 5 months worth, and so if we multiply that or estimate that out to a full 12 months, it comes to 1.8 million, which is a little bit less than what we had budgeted, and that's kind of the trend with the whole county is it's just slightly on the downward trend. Our TOT has seen a big decline. We are hopeful that that will rebound. One of the larger motels in the city is under new management, so we're hopeful that they will get that kind of ship righted and hopefully get some more visitors into the city. Jumping all the way down to our other revenues, you can see a huge increase, and that was due to the sale of 280 12th Street, and that netted the city almost $175,000. And then we also received a police grant of $25,000 in other revenue as well. So if you take out the sale of 280 12th Street and the police grant, we are just a little bit ahead of where we would expect to be so far this fiscal year.
It netted us almost 875, not 100.
875,000, yes. Yeah. All right, so on to our operating expenditures. So you'll see our interim city attorney has been doing a great job so far. Also, one of the benefits we've seen is that they are not billing us as much as we have seen in the past. And so we're expecting that to not come in nearly as much as we started the year out as, estimating 75,000. We've only been billed 10,000 so far for 6 months, so we're real pleased with not only their service, but how much they're charging. The $44,000 increase, estimated increase in the general government department is due to a $50,000 supplemental budget request, and that was approved by council at the September 3rd meeting for architectural and appraisal services to evaluate 2600 Newburgh for the potential new police facility. And then you can see the almost $30,000 overage in the police department. 25,000 of that was for the Jalmerberg grant that I mentioned we got in revenues. We also increased expenditures at the same time. So those offset, but we see it in both places. And then PD's a little bit over also, partly due to the police chief's retirement. There was an additional amount on accrual buyouts that we weren't anticipating. So again, if we take out the $50,000 supplemental budget request for the architectural and appraisal services and the $25,000 police grant, we're coming in a little bit better than where we had thought as far as our expenditures are concerned. So to put these both revenues and expenditures together, you'll see so far our mid-year estimate, we're estimating to have net sources of over 850,000. If we take out the 875 that we received for 280 12th Street and the $50,000 of that, which will be used for the architectural services for 2600 Newburgh, we're right at the adopted budget amount of $25,000 surplus. So we're hitting our mark pretty spot on so far this year. So that was the general fund. Now we'll go on to our enterprise fund. So the first one, the water fund. This is a pretty similar story as in years past. Our revenues in the water fund remain stable and easy to project, as we've not seen a rate increase since fiscal year 10-11, and revenues only increase as additional connections are made. The water fund is projected to have a little over $90,000 in operational savings. But even with those savings, you'll see the bottom line there, net uses of $445,000. However, the projects are funded with the wastewater or the water capital fund reserves, which currently totals approximately $5 million. And that was money that we received from the debt service issuance. So if we take out the $470,000 for our projects, you'll see that our operating revenues are just enough to cover our operating expenditures for our water fund. And then it's pretty much the same exact story here in our wastewater fund. Our charges for services remain stable and are easy to project. Our operating budgets, there is nice savings there. There's been a couple of vacancies in the wastewater plant throughout this whole year, so that accounts for a large portion of that. And then again, if we take out the $880,000 that's funded through our capital reserves fund, there'd be about a $200,000 surplus for the wastewater capital improvement fund. So looking forward, our next steps for our budget process, this was a good way to gear us up for our 2021 budget. On March 17th, we'll have the departments present to the Measure E committee their proposed items that they want funded. And then we'll give the Measure E committee a couple weeks to think over not only the department projects, but also the community projects that were presented at the January meeting. And they'll come back in April, and that's when they'll finalize their recommendations. And I'll take those and include them in the proposed budget that will be presented to council. And then hopefully by late April or early May, we'll have our first special council meeting to do a budget workshop, and we'll go over the general fund. This is similar to previous years. And then we'll have a second follow-up one to answer any questions on the general fund and to go over the enterprise funds, which is water, wastewater, and transit. And then in June, hopefully we'll adopt the budget at a regular council meeting. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor. If there's any questions with the packet that I put together, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, that's it.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions?
Concise.
Good report. Thank you.
Mayor Long, just one comment too. I'd just like to say, I think Aaron's been doing a great job of really tracking that budget, making sure when additional expenditures come up, we have a budget request and taking those to council. And then also on the part of all of our department heads and division heads, when you look at those budgets, they're not too far off what we budgeted. So we have our folks looking at those and operating within those budgets. And I think that's one strength that we have, is that we really do try to live with the budget that the council sets and stay within that.
Thank you for the great explanation, because when I looked at that item, I thought, man, this is a workshop by itself. So thank you for the concise Cliff Notes version that was easy to digest.
All right, moving on, our city council business. Approve a letter of support from the city council for Proposition 1 stormwater grant application for the 12th Street Integrated Stormwater Enhancement Project.
So I think this is a great project. I'm looking forward to hearing our presentation from our deputy city engineer and our consultant on this. I think this is a project that could kind of kill two birds with one stone, improve some of our drainage on 12th Street, as well as meet some of our LID requirements. I'd just like to say that Travis Clossy, our assistant engineer, he reached out for some of the initial grant funds that you'll hear about. He's here tonight too, but he's been a big part of making this happen, as well as Brennan and Kevin looking at the stormwater along 12th Street. So with that, I'll hand it over to Brendan.
Thank you, Merritt. So, Honorable Mayor, City Council, I'd like to take a little bit of your time to present this project. Tonight we'll have Brett Vivian here with GHD, who will present a a little PowerPoint here that's going to talk about the Prop 1 Technical Assistance Grant that the city received to develop this project, kind of the alternatives analysis that got us to where we are today, and the preliminary design for the 12th Street Integrated Stormwater Project. So briefly, before we dive too deep into it, wanted to take a moment to kind of summarize the so what of this project. So why are we doing this at this location, why this project, and why we're here talking about it tonight? So to answer why this location, a stormwater management project is certainly needed along 12th Street in Fortuna. There's currently no storm drain in the street, and with larger rain events, the street experiences localized gutter flooding. Simply put, we need to get the water off the roads. As for why this project, we feel that packaging together a storm drain and LID project together offers more benefits than simply just a pipe extension in the street by itself. These additional benefits include urban greening, stormwater treatment, MS4 compliance, and reserved capacity in our existing storm drain system. Lastly, we're here tonight presenting this, seeking your concurrence for this project by approving a letter of support that would be included in a Prop 1 implementation grant application for final design and construction funding for the project we're about to present. As Brett will touch on, we have the opportunity here to pursue a $1 million grant for a project on 12th Street at a cost to the city of a match of about $100,000. To put that into perspective, if the city were to complete a CIP project to install storm drain pipe alone in the same footprint, it would come out of a cost of approximately $300,000 to $400,000, all of which would require city funding only. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Brett, who will present the project in its specifics.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, thanks for having me back and for going through a couple presentations by GHD tonight. Brendan gave a great summary of the project, and so I'll just add a little bit of detail to what he presented to you. So a little bit of background on this project or the grant. So the funding is through Proposition 1, the Assembly Bill 1471, so authorizing billions of dollars. Voters approved that for the state of California, and these funds were earmarked for water projects, including surface and groundwater storage, ecosystem and watershed protection and restoration, and drinking water protection. A few years back, when we were looking for some additional funding for the Roner Creek project, we were pursuing some of this funding, but we were unsuccessful. We were really focusing on in-stream improvements on the Roner Creek project. We tied in some LID, some stormwater sort of improvements, but that was ultimately unsuccessful. But in this round, the Water Board basically invited us back. So there's a technical assistance that's available through the State Water Resources Control Board to help small disadvantaged communities develop, fund, and implement Prop 1 eligible stormwater capital projects. So that really focuses on developing competitive grant applications. The city does a great job with developing these applications and being successful, but the Water Board actually said, hey, to these consultants that I'll get to in a moment, City of Fortuna was unsuccessful in this project previously. Maybe you could help them, work with some other consultants, retool it, and then be more successful in the future. So the Water Board did, kind of recognize the City of Fortuna as a good candidate. So the City of Fortuna was awarded $300,000 to pursue this technical assistance. So really, that's the Council for Watershed Health. They're a nonprofit out of Southern California, and Darla Ellswick. They put forth this grant application to provide technical assistance for multiple communities, and Fortuna is one of those. And then the Darla called Travis to inquire about the project, see if the city was still interested in pursuing the project. He let them know that GHD had done some of the legwork and had been involved in the previous application, and then that consultant reached out to us, and we were happy to help out. So the technical assistance, it supports the design development, so kind of a detailed alternatives analysis, and then some concept design drawings, and then also it includes the grant application. And so it funds projects at a minimum of $250,000. That includes like final design, permitting, implementation, all the way up to 10 million. So there's a pretty wide range of costs that a project can take. So the technical assistance implementation, it was awarded that technical assistance to the Council for Watershed Health, that nonprofit that I had mentioned. Council for Watershed Health, great organization. This was the first time that we got to work with them, but great people, great organization. They promote more efficient use of stormwater resources and provide leadership, guidance, technical assistance to agencies and organizations to effect sound watershed planning and management. They used to be pretty focused in Southern California. They've expanded that to kind of statewide, and a lot of it is through technical assistance, and they really do focus on kind of disadvantaged communities or communities that need a little extra help putting together applications. And then they're supported by consultants, Darla Ellswick, who is out of San Luis Obispo, and then they reached out to GHD, and they've reached out to other consultants in other areas of California. But this project is fairly unique in the geographic area. It's the only project up here in Northern California that they're pursuing. So the objective was the identification, evaluation, and design of a multi-benefit stormwater management project to improve water quality of local creeks and the Eel River, to provide urban greening and improved community, and support regulatory compliance, the MS4 requirements in particular that Brendan mentioned. So when we started looking at this project, we had already had an application that was unsuccessful, so we looked at how can we bolster this application. Now we have some funding to really kind of focus on identifying priority areas and figuring out where does the city really, where can they use these dollars the best. So looking at the priority areas, we got a lot of input on operations and maintenance from your street staff, from the engineering staff and public works staff. We considered zoning, business types. We looked at the storm drain master plan, and then also kind of evaluated different characteristics throughout the city, in particular about the soils and then the depth to groundwater, to figure out where can we kind of infiltrate water, store water, and what makes sense. So evaluated the stormwater alternatives. So or looking at those different constituents, we located 5 different potential project areas. So that was 11th and N Street. There is a small, it's kind of off of Main Street, and then there's a little car wash there. 12th Street, basically in front of the high school and down to Lonnie Drive. So there was a small area on Spring Street and 3rd Street at the dead end there that we looked at. Fortuna Boulevard, between Newburgh Road and Strongs Creek Plaza, and then on School Street, between Boone and Ronald Avenue. So we were really looking for areas to do surface bioretention. So that's where we can do some infiltration and treatment, where we can capture some water, infiltrate it into the ground, not put quite so fast to the storm drain system and into the creeks. And then also do some urban greening, some planting. Fortuna does a great job, especially on Main Street and Fortuna Boulevard with the medians and then the little alcoves where you guys do planting. And then also we looked at trees, so stormwater and the benefits of incorporating trees for stormwater. So for their uptake, and then slowing down of the flows, and then the multiple benefits with kind of urban greening and other benefits. So our alternatives analysis, we looked at the various opportunities and constraints in areas, largely, for example, along 12th Street, utilizing areas where there's red curb and we're not impacting parking, looking for areas where there are issues with, the potential future issues with MS4 requirements, trash capture, and so we kind of looked at all of these different elements at all of the different sites to kind of target a project site. So came up with a concept for each site and put together a conceptual level of cost estimate. And then we also looked at, for this grant application, you really have to quantify the level of treatment that you're getting. So how much water goes in, and then what are all the pollutants? What's standard that comes in stormwater, and then how much of that are you removing? So there was some quantitative analysis to it. But where we got to was a preferred project on 12th Street. In particular, because this project is, fits within the budget of the city, so we were looking at something for we got feedback from staff that their 10% match, the city's 10% match could be about $100,000, so that translates to about a $1 million project, and 12th Street kind of fit that. An area where there's real need for surface drainage management. In talking to the high school, I think they describe it as a river that flows down there on the high flow events. So, you know, that was a good thing. And the high school was on board as well, so the community input and the, you know, stakeholders was really important. I'll get into a little bit of the improvements on the high school property, but they've been really a pleasure to work with and see the benefit of it. Targeting areas where there's a high concentration of trash or potential for trash capture. So that's getting to your MS4 requirements. And then a size of project that is maintainable for your existing staff. You know, we don't want to implement something that then just, you know, that's really difficult to maintain. And then also really increasing pedestrian visibility. So shortening crosswalks, putting in bulb outs, something where people can be seen by the traffic coming by, and, you know, so kind of bringing in some of that like safe routes to schools concept, but into the stormwater, and we can kind of achieve that with some of the LID features. So this 12th Street Integrated Stormwater Enhancement Project, you can see a kind of rendering from a Google Earth photo and superimposing some of the rain gardens here on either side. And so we're focused on the stretch of 12th Street between K Street down to about Lonnie Drive. And the general concept, there are some example LID basins. If you're not too familiar with them, you do have some out here in front of City Hall. There's more flow through. They are in other areas of the city. So slightly different design. We're going for more that water flows into the basin. We can store some water and infiltrate it. Anything that's in excess will go to the storm drain and flow through a pipe. So looking at it kind of on a side view or a profile view. Surface inflow flow through the gutter, come into the basin. It can sit there and infiltrate down to subsurface, and if the flows are too large, then they can go into a storm drain, and then kind of supplement with and we'd connect to the existing pipe system that you already have. So just a little more detail on K Street. We're looking at putting a bulb out and LID facilities right there on the corner of Bob's Footlong, and then on the corner of the high school. And then down at the J Street intersection, so the drop-off zone, this is where we put bulb outs on both sides to improve some pedestrian visibility, and we're implementing a new storm drain pipe that would start up at Bob's Footlong and continue down the east side of the street where there is none now. So that would eliminate a lot of the flooding in the roadway, especially in that drop-off zone. Moving south, we're just kind of taking advantage of the places where there's already red curb, because we don't want to impact, you know, the residences along the street for their parking, or during, you know, large events like football games or basketball games when parking might be a premium. And then down to I Street. So at I Street, that's where your existing storm drain system starts. So we're basically you know, kind of amending that existing storm drain system on the west side, and then we would tie into the existing system on the east side. And then just moving down, so down between I Street and Lonnie Drive, implementing a few more. So kind of really, you know, focus on greening the street and implementing some trees. And then also a large basin, the high school has been supportive, as I said, on the south end of their parking lot. And we can also create a little bit of a visual barrier between the hotel there and the high school's parking lot. And then they have a storm drain system that comes through here, so we'd kind of just tie into that and allow a lot of that water to infiltrate. So few just kind of general amendments to the presentation are that, so the city staff has been working with the high school to address any sort of maintenance, security, and line of sight concerns that they've had. And then we've been meeting with them as well, so those discussions are going well, and I think that they'll do an MOU or a maintenance agreement sort of thing, then that'll help bolster the grant application, but to see the support from the high school. The design includes bioretention soil media, so that's kind of like a sandy soil, more for like grasses and such. But we also pushed back on the water board, and we did a little bit of a study to do an amended soil so that we could incorporate trees and then a larger variety of plantings, so that we can kind of reach out to either the local garden club or also city staff and council to figure out what the right plants are to put in these and have a little more flexibility. So we're asking the city council for a letter of support, and also in that letter it says that that you are representatives of the community and that you support the project, and so I think that's in your board packet. But that's a huge help for the grant application, if not a required component. So we really appreciate that. So the grant proposal is going to be available in March. So we're going to start putting together that application with Darla Ellswick and the Council for Watershed Health. And then the notification of awards is likely in the third quarter of 2020. But as grants go, it might be the fourth quarter, it might be the first of 2021. But it is coming out in March, and then hopefully we'll hear back in the third quarter of 2020. And then the contracts with the state board are anticipated the following 6 months. That's all I have for now.
Good presentation. Do you guys have any questions?
Can I ask a question on slide number 14? Was that between the hotel and the high school? I mean, that parking lot's a lake. Is that? That one.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand where that's going. Is that?
Oh, yeah. I apologize. So, so the tennis courts are right here.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is running east and west.
Okay. So the dark,
yeah, sorry.
shaded area is the backside of the hotel?
Correct, yeah. So it's the south end of the parking lot here. The tennis courts would be right here. The hotel or motel is on the south side. So the high school has a storm drain system that comes down in here and then comes along and then ties into your existing system. So we're basically going to take advantage of that alignment. The high school kind of said that nobody really parks there, so it's kind of a nice opportunity to do that. And then we can do some grading of some asphalt just out here in the front to try, make sure the water gets there. But there's a good amount of water that comes from their storm drain system throughout the high school property that comes through there.
And then,
Go ahead.
I don't know what MS4 means.
Municipal small storm sewer system.
So essentially, it's a permit that we have. The Regional Water Quality Control Board says, city, you will do all these things, and it's not like it's an optional thing or a permit we applied for, but just being a city, they've delegated their responsibility for us to do things like oversight of, construction stormwater permits, and they have new regulations that are requiring us to look at all the industrial permits throughout the city. They've required us to incorporate low impact design into all the projects, and they say, you will oversee all this stuff. And one of the elements of this is trash capture. The other one is incorporating LID projects. So I think this was the kind of project where, when you can get a grant to put together a concept and not spend $100,000 of your own money and come up with, and, have your grant application paid for, I think it's a great win. I still remember Travis came to me and said, they keep calling and asking if we want help with this. I think it might be a good idea. And so this is one of those situations where it really turned out to be a good idea, and I think something that could not only, help meet our permit requirements, meet our drainage requirements, but also really make 12th Street look nice in conjunction with our recent undergrounding project.
So I'm excited about the timing of this because the new property owner of 280 12th Street is going to be having to do some of those LID projects that are going to tie in really nicely with this project. So I hope we can cooperate with him really well to make all that flow nicely. And then, so do we send a thank you note to Darla since she's the one?
Yeah, yeah, that would be great. I mean, yeah,
Along with
Darla
that
and
letter.
the Council for Watershed Health really just like kind of reached out with a different format than I think we're all used to, where they were like, no, we have funding, let us help. So it was great.
Cool, thank you.
All right, thank you, Brett. Does anyone from the public have any comments on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment, and I do apologize for not asking you guys if you wanted to comment on the previous discussions. I totally spaced it. So we need a motion.
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution 2020-0.
Wait.
Am I on the right one?
Page 136.
Sorry. Well, I'm just trying to hurry this right along, aren't I? 136.
I make a motion to approve a letter of support for the Proposition 1 grant application for the 12th Street Integrated Stormwater Enhancement Project.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Our next item is to accept all of Volume 1 and the city's portion of Volume 2 within the Humboldt Operational Area Hazard Mitigation Plan Update, Resolution 2020-06.
So Kevin Carter, our Deputy Director of Public Works, is going to provide this staff report. And I will say that Kevin did the heavy lifting for this project. He attended a number of meetings, worked with the consultant that was provided by the county. He'll fill you in with more of those details. But I say this is one more thing, too, another step to participate in the hazard mitigation plan that allows us to position ourselves for grant funding. And as Kevin's running through the staff report and talks about how those opportunity, how having this plan helps us be competitive for those opportunities. We've received a number of hazard mitigation grants recently, including for the wastewater treatment plant flood protection project, the Roner Creek flood protection project, and then we were just informed last week that we received a $338,000 grant for stationary generators at the Kenmar and Drake Hill pump stations. So Kevin's been doing a great job on working on these, and so it's not just a plan that we have to do to adopt a plan. It's a good opportunity to look at risk and mitigate them. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Merritt. And good evening, council. And the last one that Merritt mentioned there with the stationary gen sets really are kind of timely with our PSPS PG&E events too. So it's going to be kind of pulling double duty and not having to have our staff get out there 2 o'clock in the morning, every time, that they can concentrate on other things and check in on it. So it's pretty exciting to have that. So what staff is asking for tonight is for council to consider the adoption of resolution 2020-06, accepting the city section of the Humboldt Operational Area Hazard Mitigation Plan. Back in August of 2018, staff started attended meetings with the Humboldt Operational Area partners, and it was basically a coalition of 23 different cities and other entities working together to update the local hazard mitigation program. And in doing so, we are able, as Merritt mentioned, to go after grants, and we've been pretty successful with it. The biggest one is the flood control project down at the treatment plant that really kind of was a good project. And the match for these grants are 25%, so we get 75% of the funding for the projects, and within that, this process allows us for pre-disaster hit mitigation grants, as well as what's the other one called again? Basically just multiple flooding type projects, because that's kind of our biggest concern. We don't really worry a whole lot about the other, dam failures or earthquakes. We do a little bit of earthquakes, and we do a little landslides, but tsunamis, we're out of the tsunami zone. But we really kind of focus on flood control projects and working on projects that really help us out with our hazards that we end up having to deal with. So the last time we did this was back in 2014. This is our second time through. We're there, the county's doing their part. All we're asking for tonight is to approve the resolution so that the document can get finalized with FEMA and Cal. Oh, yes. And then one thing to consider when you're looking through this packet, there's a list of projects, but it's a living document. As things change over the next 5 years, because this is an every 5-year deal, then we can add projects to it, and we can ask for funding for those as well. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. And then once we do get this plan adopted, we will be integrating some of these projects into our future CIPs, realizing that only as funding is available, because we do have that 25% match, and we always try to keep that in consideration. It's always great to go after grants, but you always want to, be fiscally responsible about it. So with that, if there are any questions, it's kind of a longer staff report. I kind of shortened it up a little bit. And there's also the annexes is included in this as well. I find it to be a interesting document to kind of take a look at all the different maps that were provided, and those were all, gone through by the consultant that was hired by the county, and it's a good document. It's a helpful document, and so with that, I'll answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions?
I got one, but I don't know, it's reading through and just having seen some projects done, the berm project and that, the difference between a pre-disaster mitigation grant and a hazard mitigation grant. I went through and read the appendix, and I realized this is the same people that gave us the federal tax code that wrote this, but it's difficult.
So, yeah, and it's pretty difficult to explain. Merritt might have a better understanding of it than even I do, but I'll just go ahead and,
Let's just say that, FEMA reviews these, and they've reviewed this plan, and that it has their tentative approval pending the approval from all the agencies. I think one of the important things, if you're going to look at this on page 158, 159, in those pages that follow, it lists a bunch of the projects that were in the hazard mitigation plan before that were taken out, ideas of projects that we added, things like raising the grade on Dinsmore Drive, so when we have a flood, we can get in and out of the treatment plant. You can see other projects that were taken off, like detention basins at Strongs Creek. There was, in the past, they had planned for detention basins that were there that could be on channel. You can't permit those, and you can't build those now. So really, going through and updating this to reflect the projects that we currently think would be useful for mitigating disasters. That was a big part of the work on here, and looking at those projects that should stay in and which ones should come out, and kind of thinking of which new ones should go in there. So that was a big part of this, and now having this, we're going to be looking for those grant opportunities.
another important one, I think, is the stabilizing of the hillsides of mass landslide movements. That's a good opportunity to go after some of the ones that we have some movement.
You brought up the pump stations down, that's the one thing I thought of was the Kenmar pump station.
Yeah.
That old road going up the hill and the creek coming down around 3.
Right.
Right. One of the other projects that we're currently working on an application for that we want to pursue too is we have a number of storm drain failures. I mean, every year, I think the council, we've had to bring you supplemental budget requests to fix at least 1, 2, or maybe 3 sinkholes, but we're looking at doing a vulnerability assessment and looking, they won't pay just to do a storm drain master plan, but when you look at vulnerability, which is really, we've been in more of a reactionary mode on our storm drains, if we can go out, do a comprehensive report, look at our vulnerabilities, and then start looking at getting funding to mitigate those and get 75% grant funding through this program, that's an area that I think we can be effective and that we really need to focus on, because right now we're spending general fund dollars on those, and if we can leverage, a 25% match to get a plan in place, a vulnerability assessment, that's one that we're really looking forward to and we'll be pursuing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions? Does anyone from the public have any comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll close public comment.
May I now?
Yes, you're on the right page.
The right page, earmark
Right
it.
page, all right. I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 2020-06 and read by title only.
Second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Sienna?
Resolution 2020-06, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Fortuna authorizing the adoption of the Humboldt County Operational Area Hazard Mitigation Plan 2020 update. Councilmember Glauser?
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Stanfield?
Yes.
Mayor Long?
Yes. Thank you. Moving on to approving a supplemental budget request to increase fiscal year 2019-2020 budget for Fund 290, which is SB1, to include funds from previous year's savings.
So, exactly, this year, we have in the budget $200,000 for SB1 projects. That was our estimated allocations for this year's SB1 funds, which is to improve our roadways. And it was the new gas tax that came in a couple of years back. We are wanting to fix 12th Street, and as you can probably see on driving over here, we're really serious about it, and we're going to be starting tomorrow morning. And we will find funds to make it work either way, but we wanted to be able to move a little bit of money around from this previous year's savings to make sure that we can do a really good, deep grind and inlay on 12th Street and have it last for a good long time. And so what we're planning on doing is grind and inlay all of 12th Street from the railroad tracks up to L and include a little bit of L as well, where some of that damage was done by the previous project. And then also, I also want to point out that we took this opportunity because we could have just let the PG&E project go and they would have tried to fix the ditches and it wouldn't have been a very good product. And so we really looked at it. 12th Street's been deteriorating a long time. We want to do something now. We've been holding off on it because we had some other projects that we didn't want to have ruin the brand new road. And so we kind of shuffled some things around and we just can't wait any longer. We got to pave that road. So what we're asking for now is to take some of the savings from previous years, add it onto what we have in this current fiscal year, and then so we can do a complete project. We are negotiated with PG&E to have a savings from what they would have had to do on rehabbing of the ditches that they did. And so it's kind of fortunate that the contractor that we use was the same one that they were going to use. So we were able to go out and have a mutually agreed upon quantities estimate. And so we are seeing pretty significant savings, probably what would have equaled out to a full block of paving if you add it all up, which is a pretty good chunk of it. And then, yeah, with that being said, I can answer any questions that you may have.
Questions?
I can sort of backtrack because we just approved the drainage project. Here we're going to spend 2 days paving 12th Street, and then we're going to come back and tear it up with the drainage pipes and the enhancements. I hope the public understands why we're doing both separate.
So one of the good things about what we're planning on doing is we're planning on paving from edge line to edge line, and which is outside of the main limits of the storm drain project. So the parking lanes, which is where the bulk of where these projects would be done in the future, which may not happen. It may happen in 2 years. So we really didn't feel comfortable not doing our project and holding off like we have been doing. But the limits really within what we're going to be doing are outside of the majority of the future project, but there will be a couple of crossings to get water from one side of the street to the other if that project does happen. Does that make sense? We're going to make sure to, Brendan and I have been talking about that just today. We anticipated that question because it's important. We try not to disturb our streets for 5 years. And so we may be doing a little bit of work on this one, but we felt that it was really important to get this street maintained before it goes even further.
So basically, you're paving the driving lanes.
Just the driving lanes.
And then the bulk and on nearly all of the stormwater improvements should be within the shoulder of the roadway. So we don't expect to be tearing out new paving to put in storm drain pipes. I mean, there could be a little where they have to over excavate, where they go beyond potentially one of the bulb outs or LID gardens, but it should be pretty minimal.
And if you do see some paving that is in the parking lanes, that's the PG&E side of it. We're not paying for that to be done. That is what they need to fix from their project outside of what we're doing.
We've heard a lot of concern from the public. People are saying, what's going to happen with 12th Street? It's in terrible condition. I think right now it's more trench than road. And So to just go through and pave those trenches back and then have some lousy parts in the middle, Kevin came up with this option, and, I think we absolutely need to get this done. Otherwise, we'd see further deterioration. It's one of our most heavily traveled streets, and it seems like a very easy choice.
It's a gateway
Yeah.
into the city. So
We had other spots, kind of earmarked this year, but 12th Street really rose to the top. And taking this opportunity so that in the future, when we do a full paving job, we won't be trying to pave around what these trenches are that'll have decent paving. We can just have it be a nice smooth surface, and it'll create the best driving surface, I think, if we do it now.
So I have people asking how they're going to get to their homes while you're paving the next couple of days. There's some concerns out there. Can you speak to that?
I think
Bob Nat here tonight.
Bob Nat.
The thing about, I'll just say a couple of general things about paving and traffic control, and Bob probably has better answers than I do, but generally, when you're paving a lane of asphalt, you can't drive on it. It takes a little while to cool down, so there will be some temporary times when they won't be able to drive in their house at all times, but once they get past and it cools down, they'll be able to get in. There is going to be some temporary interruptions. It was important for us to do it this week while school was out, and we're aware that there is a basketball game. I'll give, that people are going to want to get into that parking lot and get into high school, so. But generally, yeah, it's going to be an inconvenience to the public. We tried to pick the best week to do it, and with that, I'll turn back to Bob for more detail.
Yeah, so the plan with Mercer Fraser, we're going to close 12th Street off from Newburgh Road to I Street and do that section of town first, that section of street first. Then on the next day, we'll do the next section. So we want to just do a one bulk little area instead of just doing one travel lane, because it would have been more just hardships with safety with the guys raking on the center line and rollers and stuff. And so it was easier safety wise just to close off the street. Yes, there's going to be inconvenience. I sent out plenty of notices out door to door. Staff went out last Friday. I've been doing callbacks for homeowners and stuff. I talked to the Superintendent Sinestro and Principal Dewey about parking at Fortuna High during this times. One entrance will be open the whole time, so the northern entrance tomorrow will be open by the gymnasium, so the residents could park over there. Yes, it's going to be an inconvenience for one day. They'll be starting at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. I anticipated hopefully by 9 o'clock it'd be open, but knowing the asphalt and stuff, how it cools and stuff, we just want to make sure it's hardened up. So the turning traffic is what destroys it. People turning sharp into the driveways and stuff. That's when you see the ripple effect. So we want to make sure that's all cooled off and ready to go. And then we'll flip-flop it.
So they park somewhere by the high school and they walk to their home?
Correct.
And is everyone capable of walking to their home? Do we know this?
We don't know this. I have one family that they're expecting, and so tomorrow is actually their due date. But so I let them know if it's a medical emergencies, first responders, anything like that, we'll make a way for them to get out of there. Leave their place and get help or whatever. So I already been in contact with Chief Winburn and just have his crew all ready for it and what needs to be done. The other option was doing a night job, which was I would be getting complaint calls because of the noise and stuff. And I mean, there was no good time. I didn't want to drag this out for days, and it was a perfectly good week for it when school's not in session.
So in order to get to the basketball game tomorrow night, go through town, turn from Main Street towards the high school?
Correct. Yep. And then when it flip-flops, the next section, the southern entrance will be open, but I Street should be open. So people could just get through town, take I Street, and get into the parking lot.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So we heard earlier from the public commenter that it took Bob 2 days to get some striping done, and this will be approved tonight, and they'll have that done tomorrow, so. Pretty high standard for yourself, Bob, so.
Hey,
Might wanna be
Superman. All right, thank you. So where are we? Anyone from the public have any questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll close public comment.
Page 178?
Yes.
Okay.
I concur.
I'll make a motion to authorize the city manager to approve a supplemental budget request to increase the funds available for fiscal year 2019-2020 for SB1 projects.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Hey, Jeremy, the next one is no page.
Okay, we're done?
All right, next we have our city manager's report.
I'd like to just review the upcoming meeting schedule. Our next regularly scheduled council meeting will be on March 2nd. We have a planning commission, our next planning commission meeting is on this coming Tuesday, February 25th. Our next Measure E meeting is, and at that next planning commission, one of the things that'll be taken up is the short-term rental. So that's one of the things that the council saw in a workshop. That'll be going to the planning commission meeting on the 25th. That's at 6:00 p.m. The next Measure E meeting is March 17th, and I think our finance director discussed that and what would be happening at that meeting, but that'll be a selection of what the projects are in the Measure E funding. The next Roner Community Recreation District will be on March 4th. Have a few items that I wanted to include in my verbal report. One of them, I received an announcement in the mail. The McLean Foundation is celebrating its 20th anniversary, and they'll be having a grand opening on February 25th from 2 to 5. There were a number of events, and so we sent out an invitation to city staff.
The 25th?
I'm
Oh, the
sorry,
29th.
February 29th.
Okay.
I had 2 to 5, that's the times, but I 25th. And also, I wanted to point out that a newsletter went out by the Chamber of Commerce, and I wrote an article in there that went out through the whole city. They do a pretty nice job with their newsletters. They're published by the North Coast Journal, and it's a small green pamphlet. I don't know exactly what the sizes are, but we put an article in there to introduce some happenings at the city, and we put a pretty comprehensive digest of what the city's spending their Measure E dollars on. And that was, Measure E committee is really wanting to see us get it out there. We thought it was an ideal platform, and so we tried to interject to put a column in there with a little bit of humor and lightheartedness, and also talk about the benefits the public's getting from those Measure E dollars. We submitted on Friday 3 Measure Z requests for funding to the county, and those include the continuation of the funding for our drug task force officer and for our school resource officer. Each one of those was a separate project. And then we also asked the county to fund our K-9 program and to get that back up and running. I'm continuing to work on the police facility options, and we'll be planning on bringing that back at the next meeting in March. Hopefully, I don't want to extend it beyond that, but we expect to bring that back on March 2nd. We've been preparing for interviews for the police chief, and we tentatively have those scheduled for next week. Let's see, we notified you about the grant we found that we were notified about for the pump stations for Kenmar and Drake Hill. And then also on February 5th through 7th, I attended a League of California Cities meeting in Napa, and there was a number of really valid items that were presented. Heard directly from the staff person who's from HCD, who's responsible for implementing a lot of the housing related grants to address the need that the governor stated for housing. We heard directly from the director of PERS and had a panel discussion on the pension issues. And then very interestingly, we heard from a number of cities who are being proactive to help their businesses avoid 88 lawsuits. Excuse me. And that's all I have.
Sorry.
It's the angle you're twisting.
All right, future agenda items.
With the indulgence of the council, I'd like to have another workshop regarding rent stabilization for mobile homes. But it's up to the group to.
Yeah, I would like to know what the property owner has, if they've got any movement on the property owner's maintenance of the property and that.
So you want that as a workshop?
I would, yeah.
We're aware of that. We just haven't had a chance to.
Excuse me?
I thought the planning commission already talked about it.
We had one workshop, but
We
I don't know if
talked about
anybody
it.
else did.
Yeah, I don't think anyone else did.
I thought it was on the agenda for the planning commission to address it.
Planning commission doesn't do that.
They didn't.
They don't. That's not
Thought they were
under
going
their
to
purview.
pass it to them to discuss it.
Not for rent control.
I remember we last left it in the group that came to speak to the council, and they were gonna talk to the property owner and the management company in regards to what they're doing with the maintenance. And that was the last thing I remember. I don't know if Jeremy.
So where we left it is that the council asked staff to look into it and do some outreach and kind of talk to some of the residents up at Royal Crest and the other mobile home parks. We haven't got to it yet, so it was left in staff's hand to try to do some more outreach and then bring this back to council. So we're aware you want it as a future agenda item. There's been a lot of other things we haven't been able to get to it yet. So it's on our list of things to do, and you'll probably see it come back with our list of planning priorities. We just haven't got to it yet.
Okay.
And we haven't really received any further outreach from any members of those parks either. So we haven't been hearing more. So if you did have any communication, I'd like to hear. Maybe we could get together and you could tell me what you're hearing.
Okay, yeah, I had a meeting with a group from that particular park, and I mean, there's just a lot that they're suffering with during the winter months especially, so I'd like to continue the conversation, give them an opportunity to speak, and whether we can do anything or not, I want to know what their concerns are, how we can best support their efforts. They're basically afraid of their landlord, so, I mean, we really need to, as much as we can, support those individuals, at least to empower them or give them some reinforcement at whatever level we can.
Okay, so we're probably getting too much going here, so
Yeah.
it's on the radar.
Okay.
It's not on our agenda, so
Okay.
we hear you.
Thanks.
Okay,
And then,
got it.
can I get an update on the city website at some point?
Sienna maybe can do that because Mary can't talk.
Yeah, I'm happy to give you an update.
So,
So,
and it can be a future agenda, I mean, that's what she asked
oh,
for,
that's
so.
fine.
Okay, those are my two things.
Okay, do you want to just maybe give us a little presentation
will.
next time?
That would be
Next
fine.
meeting?
Yep.
Perfect, thanks. Okay, anything else for future agendas? Nope, okay, Dean.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Nothing to report on Redwood Coast Energy Authority. As we've already discussed, the oh my gods, wow, the effect 12th Street paving is going to have on the public and the businesses for 2 days. All I could say is make believe we had the power outage and we're flooding, and stay inside, don't go anywhere. And turn the TV up so you don't have to listen to the tractors and the congestion and noise outside. But
No, it's short term, 2 days, be patient.
all right, okay.
Right?
There's Bob. Put it on his shoulders.
Poor Bob.
Hey, and what's your private telephone number, Bob? Okay. So anyway, folks, just bear with it. The end result will be far, far better than what you've got right now. And for the people looking on the outside, oh man, pave that sucker so I can go twice as fast. And so I hope the police department they're aggressively enforcing the speed limit because it's only 25 miles an hour and people don't pay attention. For the Public Works and the CCC and the members of the community, they have been aggressively removing the brush alongside the Palco property and South Fortuna Boulevard. All I gotta do is give you guys kudos. You have made the life in Fortuna so much better by removing the hellholes created by the homeless people that have now chosen to go elsewhere. They're still around, but there's not as many as there are. The end result is our quality of life in our city is far, far better. So be vigilant. You have the police department's telephone number. You see somebody who's panhandling illegally, or you're in question of what their panhandling policies are, and you feel offended, call the police department and let them address that. That's why they're there to help protect us. I know this is going to maybe be pushing the envelope, but it covers all party lines. So I can't say one party versus another. This affects every single person in the state of California from the early 1970s that owned a business or a residence. This time for the primary, the state of California has aggressively made an attempt to remove Prop 13 coverage and protection of your businesses. They will aggressively come after the homes if they're successful at convincing and duping the public to believe what the purpose for Prop 13 is, And so if you have a business or you're a private citizen, please vote no on Prop 13. It will set pace for you to have your Prop 13 protection and having the value of your home flatlined. It will not be flatlined anymore, so it becomes vulnerable. So vote no on Prop 13. God bless America and God bless our troop. May you be safe wherever you are. And last but not least, if you manage to know that we're on Channel 11 and you've endured watching our quality council meeting, I have to thank you for doing that and enduring the last 3 hours, because it is informative. You can't read about this in the newspapers, so thank you very much, folks.
Mike?
Thank you. I've had the opportunity to do a couple of things. One of the biggest and enjoyable was which I did with our General Services Superintendent Bob and Mayor Long, Mayor Pro Tem Trent, myself. We went to the annual Fireman's Dinner, and they speak to the public regarding what they've done for the past year and recognize some of their own, much as the police department in Fortuna does with their crews. And some of the awards were, we have an awesome Explorer program, training up new firefighters, and the Explorer of the Year is one that demonstrates a positive attitude and leadership qualities and brings enthusiasm and participation to the program, and that was Montserrat Carrillo. The Ladies Auxiliary, which did awesome. If you were around at the Star Hotel fire and saw the food brought out and the care, the water, the rest breaks that were given for the fire department, the firefighters from all over the North Coast, the Ladies Auxiliary helped coordinate that. Well, here now, they've given an award to their own. They call them the Awesome Ladies Auxiliary instead of awesome, the Awesome. And this year's award recipient was Deanna Glazier, the daughter-in-law of our own Dean Glazier, and she was the Awesome Ladies Auxiliary participant. A special recognition award was given to John and Diane Sinistrero for their participation in the community as well as the fire department. Diane Sinistrero was helped with the Santa Sleigh program, as well as the being a community participant with the high school kids and training for them. John Sinistrero was a firefighter, a lieutenant, the secretary treasurer as well as bringing his cooking skills to bear there. And he was also a clock keeper at the high school basketball games and cooking for the buck feed dinner. He was also a basketball player and is in the High School Hall of Fame. So John and Diane Sinistrero were recognized with a special presentation. The Fire Citizen of the Year was one who helps the fire department out and represents the community interface with the fire department and who provides help for them. That was our Cindy Dateweiler is the Fire Citizen of the Year. The Fire Chief's Outstanding Service Award was to someone who has 35 years in the fire department and 31 years on the Rodeo Association Board of Directors, Dave Victorine, who was the recipient of the Fire Chief's Outstanding Service Award. There's a lot of 35 years in the fire department. That's a lot. And he's always there to answer the radio when they have a call, even though he's in Hydesville. Then they may not even need him, but he shows up, he's ready. And the big one is the Firefighter of the Year, and he was someone who is a prior member of the Scotia Volunteer Fire Department, and then came to Fortuna in 1999 and joined the fire department. He's advanced to the rank of a division chief. He's also a rodeo board member for 18 years, and that's Division Chief Jim Heinrichs, who is the 2019 Firefighter of the Year. So it's awesome to see the people that come, and our fire department shoulders a lot with the number of calls they receive, their staffing level. The fire hall is staffed pretty much 70% of the time. So when a call comes in, instead of having to have people go there, they try to have people on site ready to answer the call. And I believe their motto is always willing and always ready, and they are. So that's one of the things I got to do. Looking ahead, we've got an HCOG board meeting this coming Thursday with a variety of things on there, but two biggest ones is a report on the last chance grade and a report on the 101 corridor project, which we'll be interested to see, because if you've driven to Crescent City lately, you know what last chance grade is like.
Yeah,
The other day, just to add,
They've lost 2 trucks already.
yeah,
Had congestion due to 2 trucks. It's like, ban the trucks. No.
so it's been bad. And one of the other things past thing I did was go to the, my first Transportation, Communication, and Public Works Policy Committee with the League of California Cities. That's pretty much an orientation, but we did see a presentation, thumbnail shot on the 2020-21 California budget. And we don't get to see a comprehensive copy of the budget, but we did see a thumbnail and had received a talk on that. And it's like $200-something billion. So then we had a discussion on the California infrastructure, the 5G small cell program, and the problems and things that have been following that because of some preemption legislation that was passed on a federal level. And Rule 20A and B and D. And then we set priorities for to fall in line with the league's priorities the big emphasis this year is on housing and how transportation affects housing, how everything affects housing. So the first thing we're talking about is supporting housing and transportation infrastructure. And so that's what we'll be looking at.
Smart growth.
So that's what we have looking forward to this year. I am looking forward to the HCOG meeting. That's all I have.
You don't have to drive too far to get to that.
Jeremy?
Over the last couple of weeks, I attended a Parks and Rec Commission meeting, and thanks to the mayor and the volunteers that stepped up, we have a full commission. So thank you for all that are participating in that. The bulk of the meeting was 2 items. The first one was to kind of piggyback on what Dean was talking about. The CCC identified a grant opportunity to do a bunch of mitigation work in the Roanoke Creek waterway, and cleaned out a ton of English ivy, as much of the Himalaya blackberry as they could get, and really allowed the native plants and vegetation to thrive in that whole area. Cleaned it all out, and it just looks fantastic. He showed some before, during, and after photos, and thanks to staff for providing that project and the disposal of all that green waste, because it was a lot. I mean, I don't know how many tons, but tons of material came out of that creek, and it just looks phenomenal. So I really appreciate the C's identifying us as a project and putting that thing together. And then they prioritized the Measure E requests for the next coming up budget year in the order of importance. They didn't go 1 through 10 or anything like that, but just identified which ones were most critical to Parks and Rec and which were more CIP projects for building maintenance and so forth. So identified some good quality projects that I think Measure E will appreciate their work, and I think that we'll get some great recommendations coming forward from that committee to us. FBID, again, thank you. We now have a full committee on the Fortuna Business Improvement District Committee. Mark Seitz joined our ranks, and I appreciate his input at the last meeting. We had a budget workshop, so that was in lieu of today's regularly scheduled meeting. So last Thursday, we had a special budget workshop. Anticipating slightly lower revenues, just because, based on the county trends of lower tax dollars from sales. But we're still able to put together a very conservative and responsible balanced budget. So looking forward to keeping in budget, keeping those projects moving forward. And I think that's all I have for that.
All right,
Thank you.
One of the organizations that the city works really closely with is the Fortuna Chamber of Commerce. And so it's been a while since we had a city council meeting. So one of the things that we did at the very end of January, we had one of our State of the City breakfasts, which are sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce, and the city gives a presentation. And we also got to hear from Sheriff Hansel and Estelle Fennell and Diana from FBID and the McLean Foundation. So very informative, a lot of work to put that together. Thank you, Merritt. But I think we pulled it off. We've gotten a lot of compliments on the information that was presented and the way it was presented. Big thanks to Aaron for all of the budget slides, and I think it was good this year. So, and along with the chamber, their annual dinner is next week, where they present a lot of awards such as Small Business of the Year, Customer Service, Volunteer of the Year. There's like 9 or 10 categories, and they just announced that the Business of the Year, which they always tell out those people ahead of time, is Whitchurch Engineering. So that was pretty cool. They do a lot of really important things in our community. They're very generous, supporting our youth and supporting nonprofits in our community. So that was exciting to see that. Plus, my son works there, so I really kind of like that too. So there's going to be a candidate forum for 2nd District. If you want to know what the candidates know and what they're running, why they're running, all those things, at the chamber lunch on Monday, which I will be out of town, so I'm hoping that a lot of people show up and ask some really good questions and find out more about each of the candidates. And I did attend one that was at the Vets Hall last week, that was put on by the Realtors Association. Only 2 of the candidates showed up, so we didn't get to hear a lot, but it was still pretty informative. So get out there, meet your candidates, and find out what they stand for. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
No, no problem.
According to the flyer, you need to RSVP with the chamber because it's supposed to be a packed house, and it's an hour-and-a-half meeting, so prepare your
Okay.
day for that.
Okay, thanks. I didn't get all that because I know I'm not going to be there.
Yeah.
Girls basketball, all 3 teams swept the league. They were all league champions. So the freshmen, the JV, and the varsity. So that's pretty cool. Varsity did lose in the Nikolai to Eureka. That was a bummer. But they play at home tomorrow at 7 o'clock. If you're going to figure out how to wind down 12th Street and get to that parking lot, go support your girls. So I know that FBID's sponsoring a home-based business coming up March 1st. Is that right? Is that Saturday?
Yes, sorry, I didn't mention.
Or Sunday.
Thank you for bailing me out.
Sunday the 1st? Is that when it is? I know it, I think,
March 1st is a Saturday.
is it?
Saturday?
March 1st is Sunday,
Sunday?
29th is Saturday.
Okay, I'm pretty sure it's March 1st.
Monday Club.
At the Monday Club.
2019.
So go check out,
Monday.
go check out our home-based businesses. There's, might surprise you how many are in Fortuna and the different things they bring to our city. So check that out. And Hot Shots basketball is almost over. I'm gonna miss a game on Saturday. I'm kind of bummed. But the Sunday skills and drills is over, so don't go to Parks and Rec on Sunday. Just go to your regular game on Saturday for 2 more weeks. I'll be out of town next week, so Jeremy has graciously taken my place at REDEC, and I appreciate that. And I think that's all I have. Again, we appreciate prayers for Tammy and her family. And that's it.
Okay. Well,
Motion
she's
to
not
adjourn?
here, we can't leave, because she always does
She
the
always
motion
makes the
to
motion
adjourn.
to adjourn.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
I second the motion.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.